Okay, so I want to talk tonight about the sugya of Le'ilu Nishmas a little bit, but I want to start with a very interesting story that more than likely you never heard. Well, we'll talk about it. I have an angle here. Let's get there. There's a Iraqi Makubal whose name was Yehuda Pitaya. You ever heard of him? He wrote many svarim. What do you say? Persian? No. He's Iraqi. Iraqis actually get very insulted when you think they're Persians. So just, take it easy there. But yeah, he was an Iraqi Makubal, a kind of a Talmud of the Ben Ish Chai, but not Mamash a Talmud of the Ben Ish Chai. He wrote a bunch of svarim called Minchas Yehuda, like Pirushim on different Kabbalistic things, whatever. He actually has a bunch of Einiklach in Eretz Yisrael, the Batzri family. I don't know if you've heard of David Batzri. There's a bunch of other Batzri brothers. Some are Mekubalim, some are big Mechaber Svarim. He had a bunch of Einiklach that he has in Eretz Yisrael. Now he put out a sefer called Ruches Misapris. It's a very interesting sefer, and the whole sefer, it's about 100 pages long, is conversations that different dibukim and ruches and ghosts and other things had with him, and the tikkunim and the programs and fixing that he had for these people. Now it's a fascinating sefer, full of very, very strange stories. Now deep into the sefer, about halfway through the sefer, he has an incredible story, a particular story about someone named Nassan Azasi. Now, I'm going to tell you Nassan Azasi is a little bit before this, just to lay the groundwork so that you understand what the story is about. Shabtai Tzvi is the Mashiach HaSheker that was probably the most damaging to Klal Yisrael, right? When he showed up on the scene in 1664, he caught on like wildfire. Everybody was brought in by him. Many Gedolim were brought in by him. Whole communities were brought in by him. And for the 2 years that the mania of Shabtai Tzvi had Klal Yisrael in its throes, it was actually pretty good. It was an upper. Because everybody was doing tshuva and trying to grow and stag and be better. But then when everything came crashing down in 1666, when he converted to Islam, so everything came crashing down, and it was very, very terrible for Klal Yisrael. Now, it's a good chance that minus Nassan Azasi, if you take Nassan Azasi out of the picture, Shabtai Tzvi might have been a mumbling bipolar individual somewhere in the back alleys of Yerushalayim, just wandering around talking to himself instead of being Mashiach. And I'll explain what I mean. Shabtai Tzvi, according to modern scholarship, probably had some kind of mental illness, like maybe bipolar or manic depressive or something like that, untreated mental illness. He definitely had delusions of grandeur. He thought he was Mashiach. But there were plenty of times when he also didn't think he was Mashiach. And he didn't always think he was Mashiach. He, was born in I think, Hebron. Then he went to Yerushalayim. And then eventually he goes to Gaza. Now, Gaza at that time had a Jewish kehillah. And in that Jewish kehillah in Gaza, there was living a young man by the name of Nassan. I think his name was Avram Nassan Ashkenazi, known to us as Nassan Azasi, Nathan of Gaza. And Nassan Azasi was a guy, a Talmud Chacham. He learned by Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz, and by all accounts, he was a Talmud Chacham, maybe a Talmud Chacham muflig. He knew a lot of learning, and at 20 years old, after he got married and moved to Gaza, he decided to learn Kabbalah. He started learning Zohar and Kisvei Arizal and etc., and he had a tremendous, acuity for it. He was very good at it. He had a very deep, deep, rich, creative type of emotions, and the way he thought about things. And he was able to blend his voluminous knowledge together with his deep emotional thoughts and create a new synthesis of very, very flavorful Kabbalah, let's say. Different than what the Arizal or whatever, but his own particular version. Now, at something in his early 20s, he had a Nevuah episode. He had a rager of some sort, a bender of some sort. He just went off the reservation. He was hallucinating and seeing things, and for 36 hours he didn't sleep, he didn't eat. He was just lost in his visions, and during those visions he became convinced that he was a Navi. It wasn't the only set of Nevuahs that he had, but he had more over the years. And at some point he became convinced that Shabtai Tzvi, this man Shabtai Tzvi, was Mashiach. And when Shabtai Tzvi arrived in Gaza to meet him, Shabtai Tzvi originally came to meet him for refuah, for his ailments. Shabtai Tzvi was not okay in the head, and he came to Nassan of Gaza, Nassan Azasi, who was like a doctor, a spiritual doctor, see if he could heal him. Nassan Azasi sits him down, and he says, "No, you don't have anything wrong with you. You're Mashiach. So of course you're not comfortable. You have a big job to do. You're supposed to be Mashiach." And supposedly the conversation goes, when Nassan Azasi told Shabtai Tzvi that he's Mashiach, Shabtai Tzvi said, No, I also was Mashiach once, but I'm over that. I'm not Mashiach anymore. And Nassan Azasi told him, no, you're wrong. You are Mashiach. You have to see this through. We have to go. We have to spread. And Nassan Azasi convinced Shabtai Tzvi to really believe that he's Mashiach, and together they set out on the road. They traveled Europe. Eventually, they split up. And Nasan Azasi was, call it the Shabtai was very smart too, and a big Talmud Chacham as well. But Nasan Azasi was like the intellectual force behind it, who really convinced Shabtai Tzvi that he was Mashiach. So in a certain sense, one could say that without Nasan of Gaza, it's possible that Shabtai Tzvi just would have been, a mumbling, mentally ill person somewhere in the alleys of Yerushalayim. If you've been to Yerushalayim, this is not a crazy hypothesis that one could find someone like this wandering around. Now, in any case, so this is Nasan Azasi. Now, after Shabtai Tzvi converts to Islam, Nasan Azasi stays along the track of pushing Mashiach, still pushing Shabtai Tzvi. He wanders from a few towns. He gets put in Chayrim in like a few different cities in Europe. Eventually, they kick him out of Europe, basically, kick him out of Italy, basically, and he goes to Greece. He's 37 years old. It's a shayla exactly which town it is, but he shows up in a town in Greece, a city in Greece, and as he comes into the town, he asks them to please call the Chaver Kadisha. He looked like a hale and healthy 37-year-old man. He says, please tell them to dig me a grave because I'm not long for the earth. And that was his parting nevuah. And Taka, he dies that night. He dies, they bury him, and the next day, his, Masharis, his Gabe that he came with dies as well. And they bury them in like a joint kever, somewhere where I've seen the copy of the Nusach on the Matzeva, Poin Nitman, Erev Kadosh, Hagoyin HaTzadik, Avram Nasin, maybe a Kohen even, Ashkenazi, Me'aza, or like a whole glowing, report on his Matzeva. And I kid you not, his Matzeva became a pilgrimage site. It became like a Shai Laza. Now, you would think, in World War I it was destroyed. We have no idea where it was anymore. It was lost forever. But his cave became a pilgrimage site.
Where was it? In Greece?
It was in a city in Greece. It's a big machlekes. You could read these articles about the lost grave of Nasan Azasi. It's Mar Mekaymis afterwards, where it is exactly. But it became a pilgrimage site, not only for Shabsayim, but the Kaf HaChaim, Rav Chaim Palachi, brings down, not the Kaf HaChaim, Rav Chaim Palachi of Izmir brings down in one of his svarim that the minhag was that before someone would go fundraise from anywhere in Greece, they would go make a pilgrimage to his grave first, like to daven for success by the kever of the tzaddik, and only then would they go do the fundraising trip. So clearly, it became a pilgrimage site not just for crypto-Sabadians, for people who still believed in Shabtai Tzvi. It became a pilgrimage site for everybody, which is a very strange zach. Now, Nishna Dem, Nasan Azasi, at least for a long time, was considered to be the mechaber of a very, very prominent sefer. There's a sefer called Chemdas Yamim. It's a 4-volume sefer today. It's all the minhagim, all the Kabbalistic minhagim associated with Yamim Tovim, Tefillah, etc. Now, you'd be surprised, you're not Hasidish, but if you were Hasidish, you'd be surprised to know how many things that became popular minhagim in the Nusach HaTefillah and related to Yom Tif and Pizmayim that we say by Hadlakas Neiris, or Pizmayim that we say on Tu B'Shvat, or Purim, or Shavuos, or Pesach, come from Chemdas Yamin. So the sefer became widely popular. It was published dozens of times. It's a very, very successful sefer. Now, it was published by someone, Rabbi Yaakov Yisrael Al-Ghazi, who said that he found it in a Ksav Yad that was handed to him. Very murky backstory as to how he came across this Ksav Yad. And in it, those who knew how to check for these things, like Rabbi Yaakov Emden and others, discovered many, many references to Shabtai Tzvi and stuff to do with Mashiach, with the fake Mashiach. So Rabbi Yaakov Emden, amongst others, said that by him it's pasha that the mechaber of the sefer is no less than Nasan Azasi. No one other than Nasan Azasi. He's the one who wrote the sefer Chemdas Yamin. Now, Lamaisa, it did nothing. It wasn't even a speed bump in stopping the popularity of Chemdas Yamin from growing, and it grew. It became almost like a basic sefer that was all over the place. At certain early Rebbes, like the Baal Shem Tov and some of his Talmidim, were against it. They said that this is a sefer that has very murky backstory. Could be it comes from the Shabtai Tzvi camp. We need to stay away from it. But at a certain point, the sefer became so popular that one way or the other, there was like a push to kasher it. To somehow figure out how the sefer or this man, Nasan Azasi, could become kosher. I mean, because the sefer that everybody uses, God gives a chayetz over here. Now, Lamaisa, today, there's a lot of riots that it wasn't, Nasan Azasi is not the mechaber, the sefer is the mechaber someone else. But during that period, let's say, call it from like 1750 to 1900, when everyone believed it was Nasan Azasi, there's this amazing little transition where in the Chassidish world and the Sephardi world, primarily, there's these different Mesiris, varying Mesiris about episode tzaddik, some tzaddik, who either when he was born or when he died or sometime in his life was misakin the neshama of Nasan Azasi, and therefore now the sefer retroactively is kosher. Like I'm afraid the sefer is kosher and everything's good to go. By the Chassidim, they blamed it on Rav Chaim of Krasna, I think, one of the lesser known Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov. In the Sephardi world, they said the Chida was the one who did it. Others have a different Mesorah. The Minchas Elazar has a whole sefer. The Munkach Rebbe wrote a whole sefer about who and what and when, the background of the sefer of Chemdas Yamim. And in it he discusses the various Chassidish Mesorahs, like who cleaned up Nasan Azasi, who was Mesakenim. But one way or another, there's like this Mesorah, Sai amongst the Sfardim, Sai amongst the Chassidim, that Nasan Azasi retroactively was like cleaned up. Someone who was Mesaken is the Shama, and therefore his sefer became kosher. So now the topic that I really wanted to discuss today is that possible for someone to clean up somebody else's neshama? Like, if one person does a lot of averis, boatloads of averis, and someone else is a really good guy, comes and says, I'm a good one, he petitions by the Bezin Shamala by Hashem, he says, could we do me a salad, let this guy, I know he's a bad guy, but let him sneak in or something. Does that exist? Like, is that possible? So, yeah, exactly. Is this possible? So I want to talk about that, but before I talk about that, the most fascinating, the most colorful description of the purification process of Nasan Azasi is in Rabbi Yehuda Petaya's Sefer Ruchas Mesapros. This Sefer that's full of all these different conversations they had with Shedu and Ruchas has a marvelous few pages about this interaction with Nasan Azasi. I want to sample a little bit for you, and then we'll try to get to the sugya aspect over here. It's Ois Tesvav, it's the 15th conversation that he had with a dibik or a shade or whatever, a ruach, a ghost or something. Maisa Nasan Azasi. He says, I want to tell you a story. He says, B'shnas Tafresh Ayin Aleph. That's not that long ago. You know what year that is? Tafresh Ayin Aleph is 1911. 1911. It's right around the corner. 1911 is not that long ago. It says the year 1911, on the second night of Hanukkah, I was sitting by the lech with my kids, Fnei Bnei Beisi, and I was telling them over the Sipur HaNes, about Nes Hanukkah, from the Sefer Chemdas Yamim. And then he says, I dozed off. I was sitting by the candles, I dozed off over there. And Bamtza Limud Re'isi Ish Echad. This guy shows up. He looked to be about 45 years old. He was fat and good looking, clean shaven, fat, good looking guy. He didn't have a beard. He just had like 3-4 stray hairs here and there. This is all straight in his description. And he was standing behind me over my left shoulders, and he leaned down his head into my ear and he whispered in my ear. And he says, Anihu HaMechaber Sefer Chemdas Hayamim. I'm the writer of the Sefer Chemdas Hayamim. V'ata shma b'koili v'nehoig ki minhagi. Listen to what I'm telling you and do my minhagim. And in parentheses he puts in what he means, what the Mechaber of Chemdas Hayamim means by nehoig ki minhagi, means that I should become a maimin in Shabsai Tzvi. And he says, if you do this for me and you believe in my minhagim, I'll teach you all the 4 svarim of Chemdas Hayamim in 1 second like this. So he says, I asked him, how could you do that? What would be your ability to do that? He said, I have a certain shame that I could say, Pasha, like it's a download, it's an instant transfer. I'll give you all Chemdas Yamim in your brain. He said, and I asked him, why would you do that for me? He says, you have to understand, the whole reason that I wrote the Sefer Chemdas Yamim was to burnish my resume. I wanted it to look like I'm a good guy, so I wrote this amazing Sefer. So now, you'll first be makabel me as your Rebbe because of this amazing Sefer that I have, and only later will I sneak in all the different, terrible things. So he says, here, amazing, this meeting ends, it doesn't go very well, and that's the end of the meeting. Period. Okay? He says, Acherkach, on the 4th night of Hanukkah, Chaf Zayin Kislev, the same year, he says, I was sitting, it was Mincha, Erev Shabbos Hanukkah, I was sitting, motiv beglima shel tzemer, like a real Svardik, glima, a nice robe in Iraq, somewhere he's sitting with his beautiful Svardik robes on Erev Shabbos. He says it was a little bit cold, and I was sitting on the floor, Yeshiv al Mitzay shel tzemer, on woolen rugs on the floor. Paint this picture in your head, like Rabbi Yehuda, there's pictures of him actually. He died in 1942. He didn't allow that long ago. A nice white beard with a tall hat, a Turkish hat, and his robes. He's on a flying carpet over there, and he's sitting and he says, and out of the corner of the window, a bird, a black raven comes into the room and it's flapping its wings, desperately trying to escape. And I see that it looks like it's been beaten and bruised, and it comes and it hides under my glima. And I look over to the window to see who's chasing it, what's going on over here. And I see 3 men, an apparition of 3 men holding big sticks in their hand. And they say, we're looking for Nasan Azasi. And I understood that obviously this bird that's underneath my glima must be Nasan Azasi, who came back for a second visit. And then their supervisor comes, the 4th guy comes, and he says, he's right over there. This guy has X-ray vision, the supervisor. He's under the glima. Go get him. In the minute that the bird hears the supervisor say this, he flies out again desperately to get away. Okay? Then he says, that night I fell asleep, v'ishan v'achlim shenis, I had a dream. So the first part was b'hakatz, the bird part. So I had a dream, and it's a weekday, and I'm davening shachris in the Beis HaKnesses, Beit El Mitzri. The detail here is like off the charts. and he says, I'm sitting in my regular seat, and somebody walks over to me, and it's Nassan Azasi, who I recognize from my previous encounters with him, and he tells me, all right, Rabbi, I'm done. I'm ready I need a tikkun. I can't do this anymore. You see what type of, tzaras I'm going through in the Kafakela and this, gray area between Gehenna and Gehenna. I can't. I need a tikkun. And the rest of this thing proceeds he says, I told him, I nodded at him, so to say, if Hashem allows, I'll give you a tikkun. And the next of it continues. It's like 2 pages of exactly what the tikkun is. He gathered together 12 Yingalite, which Kapitel Tehillim they said, the order they said, the Hiratzins that they said. It's the most vivid description of like the tikkun of Nassan Azasi is in the Ruchas Mesapras from Yehuda Pataya. So now, make of it what you want, but there's probably, 7, 8 different Messiahs of the tikkun of Nassan Azasi. But, I think born by necessity, because the Sefer was such a popular Sefer. And that's some Sefer. The real answer is he didn't write it. That's the real answer. It's not him who wrote it, it's someone else who wrote it. But in any case, it got me thinking, okay, is this taka possible? Meaning, there's all these stories, there's all these legends, all these stories about, tikkun like this. Is it possible for someone who died in Russia to have a tikkun? So the first thing that popped in my mind is the Gemara of Avodah says, those who are learning Daf Yomi learned it in Daf Beis, that Lasad Lavi when Hashem is going to be done all the umas. So the umas are going to ask for a second chance, right? They didn't get the mitzvahs, they didn't keep the Torah, they can ask for a second chance. And Hashem's immediate reaction, first of all, is, Misha Tarach B'Erev Shabbos, Yechel B'Shabbos. Misha Lo Tarach B'Erev Shabbos, Yechel B'Shabbos, meaning, Eilam Mahaba is just, it's where you get to enjoy the accumulation of whatever you did on this world, for good or for bad, right? Meaning either Gehenna is when you didn't accumulate the right stuff, Eilam Haba is when you accumulated the right stuff. There's no beating the system. Misha Tarach B'Erev Shabbos, Yechel B'Shabbos. That's it. If you prepared, you eat. You don't prepare, you didn't eat. Meaning that's the Gemara Meforeshus, and there's many Gemaras like this. Gemara in Shabbos says, B'chet Yumas, Ein Misa B'lei Chet. Meaning there's no such a thing there's no randomness, right? There's no, Eilam Haba is the accumulation, the culmination of whatever you did in this world. So what does it mean to fix, something retroactively after someone's dead? What does that mean to fix something? So then I was thinking, there's several Gemaras that seem to imply that there is the ability for someone to be fixed after they're dead. Now before I share those Gemaras, I just want to read from you, just to anchor this side. There's a tshuva from the Maram Chalava. In his Chuvas, in Shut Maram Chalava and Siman Yud Zayin, he writes as follows. I just want to read to you, to take this to its extreme, the kasha, so to speak. Ein safek b'davar, he says, there's no doubt in my mind. Ki lo yoyil v'lo yatzil, sheyaseh b'shvel adam achrim maiseh. There's nothing you can do to help a person after he dies. Ki kol adam nidin lefi mashu beis maiseh. A person's din is what he is when he dies. Lefi ma'alaseh v'hasagaseh kishetefad nafsheh migufay, yasik ma'ile v'yiske b'arachayim. Whatever level he achieved, whatever mitzvahs he's coming with, whatever he's coming with, that's what he is. That's it. There's no moving the needle. It's over. The time to do things is now. Ve'ein la teisefes ma'ile v'tayeles, mashi'asar achikach. There's nothing that you could do to bring him up or down. La'atzilim mitzarasei, u'la'atzilim mitzafayin. V'amru ki lo'yoyel la'atzilim mashi'asar achar bavurei. There's nothing a second individual could do to help a person who's upstairs facing the music. There's no action that anybody else could do to fix things that he broke. There's no way to give him milas that he didn't earn. There's no way to clean his averis that he did. This is a tshuva. The Ram Chalav is a rishon. It's a late rishon, but a rishon. Ram Chalav is writing this in no uncertain terms, that there is nothing to talk about. It's pashut, you cannot do it. So 1 second, let's say this is what I want to talk about. So he says nothing you do about it. Now Rabbeinu Avram, there's another sefer. This is less known, but also Rishon he writes, anybody who thinks that actions that his children or his friends or other people are going to do for him after he dies to clear up his name, to help him, it's just a fake thought that you have in your mind. It's a hope, a false hope that you're keeping in your mind that something else could be fixed. And this is a crazy line. We don't find anywhere in the Torah a place that you could get from there. We don't find anywhere in the Torah. Now he means the Torah itself, meaning from Bereshis Bracha, because as we'll see, there's many Chazals that would seem to be size of this. But he says you don't find anywhere in the Torah that there's anything one person could do for another person to increase his mitzvahs. It's impossible. You did what you did. That's what you left. So just to anchor that sad of Misha Tarach B'Erev Shabbos, Yechel B'Shabbos, and to say that what's done is done, it's final, and a sefer like Nassan from Nassan Azasi, Lu Yitzor, he wrote one, or his legacy or his kever, is not something that retroactively could become fixed. Meaning there's no way to fix these things. They are what they are. It's something that Ram Chalava and other Rishonim say in no uncertain terms. Very, very strong. Now, Lamaisa, we all know, it's brought down in halacha many times that this kaddish l'mashal is a chiyuv. The son is b'chuyev to say kaddish for his son. The Achrayim explain and the Halach explains because it's a schos for the father. It's part of Kibbud Aveim. Mechabde b'maisai. The Gemara in Kedushin says that Kibbud Aveim, a chelik of Kibbud Aveim is mechabde b'maisai. So it's mechabde your father after he dies. The Gemara says, what does that mean? You say Hareini kaparas mishkaveh. Rashi of an art. Rashi explains. Rashi says Hareini kaparas mishkaveh means I'm asking that I should be able to absorb his einshim instead of him. Let me get some of his einshim instead of him. So you see clearly from the Gemara, and this is something that we know in halacha, that there is some sort of loan assumption. You could take over someone else's and help fix it for them and do schosim. Now I want to sample. We're running out of time here, but I want to sample a few chazals to try to build out a picture of what this means to do schosim for someone else. Sponge cake, herring, exactly. To figure out what this means to do schosim for other people, to somehow bank up schosim for someone else. Now, I'll just start with one, and then we'll have to continue this at a later date. But there's in the Mesechtes Kala, which is one of the Mesechtes Ktanas, is the Makar for Kaddish. The Goyin in Shulchan Aruch, when he brings down the Makar for Kaddish, Zeichens to this Mesechtes Kala. Mesechtes Kala tells a marvelous story. Now, this story is brought down in a few different places. The Medrash, the Alpha Shemedi brings down a different version, but it says as follows. It says that Rabbi Akiva was once walking on the road, and Rabbi Akiva, with his vision, Rabbi Akiva, the great Rabbi Akiva, was able to see, he saw a neshama that was loitering on the side of a hill, and it was sweating profusely and working hard under some brutal system, some crazy punishment. And this neshama was really struggling. And Rabbi Akiva took pity on this neshama, and he says, B'ni, my son, how'd you end up in this situation? What's your story? And this guy tells him, Rabbi Akiva, don't bother with me. I was a bad guy. I was a ganif, I was a ritzeach, I was Baal Nair Marasa. I'm in bad shape, and I'm sentenced here for a long time to do this terrible situation. So Rabbi Akiva tells him, okay, I don't care I don't need your feelings right now. Rabbi Akiva tells him, did you leave over any children? He says, nah, I left over a pregnant wife. He says, where? He says, in a certain village, somewhere in Yana Ekveld. Rabbi Akiva says, I'm going to go take care of it. So Rabbi Akiva travels to this village. He gets there and he says, where could I find the almana of so and so? The minute he asked, Alman of so-and-so, he was a shlechte guy. Baruch HaMakom Shahargai. Who needed that person around? That was good riddance that guy's gone. He says, no, Afal Pikin. He tracks down, he goes, and there's a young child there, a 1-2-year-old child. Rabbi Akiva takes the child and he says, I want to teach you how to learn. And the kid had his father's genes, had no interest in this. And Rabbi Akiva said, no, Afal Pikin, you have to. It's not a choice. And he took him, and he forced him, and he took him to yeshiva. He forced him, until he taught him how to learn, how to daven, or whatever. It says, Rabbi Akiva told him, now that you know how to learn, go to shul, and it doesn't say exactly Nusach HaKadosh, but it says, Be Mevarach Shem Shemayim. And it says, the kid went, and he was Mevarach Shem Shemayim in shul. It says, Liyamim, Rabbi Akiva was traveling along that same pathway, and he met this neshama again with a smile on his face, and he says, Ashrecha Rabbi Akiva, Moischi Yarbu Bi Yisrael, there should be more of you. What you did for me, you saved my life, you have no idea what you did for me. And from there, this is the Mesechtes Kala, it's brought down the Medrash. So this is the Makar for saying Kaddish after someone's nifter. And clearly, from this Mesechtes Kala, from this Brayso Mesechtes Kala, you seem to see that certainly Kaddish in particular has this ability to clear up, big accounts that are supposed to be punished, or things that are supposed to be meted out to this nifter, and clear it up simply with this Kaddish. Now, we'll see maybe that perhaps there's a distinction between a son and other people. Leave that tab open. But there's several more Gemaras that I want to get to first, but to be continued. So let's jump right back in. Last night we talked a little bit about the idea of fixing somebody's averis or eternal damnation after their life. We spoke about a few examples. We said some interesting stories. I quoted a tshuva from the Maram Chalava and other Rishonim that seemed to strongly say that there's no such thing as fixing your averis and mitzvahs after you're dead. Life is when you have the chance to do it. If you miss that opportunity, it's over. There's no fixing it after death. Now, I mentioned that there's many Gemaras that seem to run counter to that, and I want to talk about them a little bit. We mentioned briefly the Brayso Mesechtes Kala with the source for Kaddish, with Rabbi Akiva. Now let's talk about some other famous Gemaras that seem to be, Rayas Lakan. One of the most famous OTDers in the history of Judaism is Acher, right? Elisha ben Avuya. He was a Tana. There's actually a Mishnah or two where his sheet is quoted. At some point, Acher, for whatever reason, goes off the derech. The Gemara in Chagiga is Meirich about Acher's life. It tells us about him, what happened to him. Taisvis, and Taisvis brings a famous Yerushalmi. As to what happened to Acher, what the reason he went off the derech was, I'll just recap quickly. Taisvis brings from Yerushalmi that at Acher's bris, his father Avuya invited all the Chachmei Yisrael to be there, and the Chachmei Yisrael was sitting and talking and learning by the bris, and they were creating like Eish HaTorah. And he became fearful. He said, what, you come here to burn down my house? He said, no, don't worry, this fire doesn't burn. This is the fire like Nesinasa B'Sinai. Halei be'Eish nitnu. The Torah was giving him a fire, this is like that fire. So Avuya saw that Eish and Torah was such a big deal. He's like, I would like my son to be a Talmid Chacham. So since the whole like germination of the idea of Elisha ben Avuya turning into a Tana was like Shalei Lishma, so maybe that's what happened. The Gemara suggests that Acher was never fully committed. He had like interest in Goyish books or Goyish music or etc. So the Gemara has a lot of different narratives about Acher. But Acher had a famous Talmud, Reb Meir, and Reb Meir had this ability to pull apart Acher's good from his bad. It says Reb Meir Rimay Matzah, he found a juicy pomegranate. Toichei Achal, he ate the soft inside. The Klipasei Zarak, he threw out the wrappers that were no good. So Acher had this, Reb Meir had this way to like dance between the raindrops and salvage what was valuable about Acher. Now the Gemara in Chagiga tells us something very interesting. It says that when Acher died, he was trapped. Acher didn't go to Gehenna and he didn't go to Gan Eden. He couldn't go to Gehenna because the Bezdin Shamala said, he's a Talmid Chacham. He's such a Talmid Chacham, he's going to go to Gehenna, it doesn't make sense. He couldn't go to Gan Eden because he had all these egregious misdeeds, these terrible Averis. So he couldn't go to Gehenna. So Reb Meir said, when I leave this world, when I'm Nifter, I'm going to be Mesader that my Rebbe could go to Gehenna. I'm going to send Acher to Gehenna. Now, when Reb Meir dies, the Elam noticed smoke coming up from Acher's kever. This is what the Gemara says. Seemingly, so Reb Meir was able to get Acher into Gehenna. So it comes along Reb Yochanan, and Reb Yochanan comments. Reb Yochanan says, this is a big accomplishment. It takes a lot of talent to get your Rebbe put in Gehenna. Get him out of Gehenna. To get him into Gehenna is not a talent. What are you doing over here? When I die, Reb Yochanan says, I'm going to get him out of Gehenna. I'll do better than you. And when Reb Yochanan dies, the smoke stops, and it's presumed that Acher was finally welcomed into Gan Eden. So, it's a fascinating Gemara, what this means, that Reb Meir got him into Gehenna. Reb Yochanan seems to be critiquing Reb Meir and gets him into Gan Eden. Rather, the Chavetz Chaim in Teres Habayis, one of his smallest svarim, the Chavetz Chaim says that what Reb Meir did to get him into Gehenna was much bigger of a zach than getting him into Gan Eden. Reb Meir had the foresight, he says, to realize that until Acher's Averis were cleansed, he couldn't proceed to the next step. So it was chess, not checkers. Meaning it was a few steps out. It's like, I'm going to get him to Gehenna so that it could get... Reb Meir was doing something, heavy lifting. Now, put that story aside, and it's a fascinating story, whatever it is. L'chaira, Hanigel and Yenenu, there's a big takeaway. Seemingly, you have someone who was a big enough Bal Aveira that he was stuck. He was in what's called, the Mekubalim call it the Kafakela, somewhere between Gehenna and Gan Eden. He's just trapped, he's floating around, he's an aimless soul. He couldn't go anywhere. Comes along Reb Meir, and Reb Meir, L'achar Moisei, was able to free him and bring him to Gehenna, and then Reb Yochanan comes along and is able to bring him to Gan Eden. So you see clearly, on some level from this Gemara, that there's an ability to be misakin someone else's Averis. Acher's done, Acher is making no more contributions to his mitzvah and Aveira account, and Reb Meir is able to come along and straighten it out. So that's a Gemara l'chair that's very shver according to Ram Chalava. Additionally, there's another famous Gemara. It's actually a Gemara in Makis and a Gemara in Baba Kama. It says that Yehuda, when he pledged that if he doesn't see to it that Yosef comes back, he's going to lose his chelik al Mahaba. Rashi brings this down. So the Chazal tell us that even though it was al Tnai, it stuck to Yehuda. And all the years that Klal Yisrael was in the Midbar, Yehuda's bones were rattling around inside of his aron, and he couldn't find peace until Moshe Rabbeinu davened to him, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, Yadav Rav Loi ve'ezim mitzar of Tia. Moshe Rabbeinu helps him that he's able to get to Gan Eden, be able to join the internal discussions in the Pamalia Shamala, join the yeshiva that's going on over there. And not only that, Moshe Rabbeinu davens him that he should be able, his word should be nishmayim. His Torah should be lahalacha, it should be listened to. So again, you see over there, this is a Rangadat Gemara, but al kapanim you see that Moshe Rabbeinu, through his tefillas, was able to take Yehuda, who for some reason, through his own inabilities, was not able to get into Gan Eden, and he got Yehuda into Gan Eden. So you see again this idea of someone else, one person coming along later and being able to fix somebody else's issues. Another famous Gemara is, the Gemara tells us with Avshalom. When Avshalom died, it's the Gemara in Saita and Daf Yud. The Gemara says Avshalom, when Avshalom died, so David HaMelech, who Avshalom had been his adversary, David HaMelech says in the Psukim, Bini, 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 7 times. And the Gemara says every time that David HaMelech said Bini, he brought Avshalom up from a Madura of Gehenna, meaning the 7 Maduras of Gehenna, and he was bringing him up one, until by saying it 7 times, Avshalom got his kapara. So you see that David HaMelech, post-mortem, Avshalom is dead, Avshalom's own mitzvahs and averos should have sentenced him to the 7th level of Gehenna, and David HaMelech was able to elevate Avshalom through his tefillah. So you see this concept again and again and again, that somebody else is able to come along later and elevate a person out of what should have been his Gehenna and bring him to Elam Haba. Now, there is some sort of distinction, and I don't know that this works for every single one of the Gemaras that I said, but there is some sort of important distinction that should be pointed out over here. And this is something I think that's very common, that everybody knows this. There's a famous Trumas of Rajba, the Rajba in Chelik Dalid, in Siman Mem Tes. The Rajba there has a Shaila. The Shaila is as follows. They asked him like this. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin that says, Bra mizaka Abba, Abba le mizaka Bra. A son is mizaka his father, meaning a son's chusim could contribute to his father's, Gan Eden, but a father can't contribute to his son's chusim. And the Tamata, the Shaila had a question. He said, "V'haloi amru misha heichen b'erev Shabbos yechel b'Shabbos." This is the question that we raised yesterday. Don't Chazal already say that if you don't have schusim, you don't get to eat in Elam Haba? Misha heichen b'erev Shabbos yechel b'Shabbos. If you didn't prepare, how are you going to eat? This is the Rajba's kasha, to which the Rajba goes off on a little bit of it's not a very long tshuva, like most tshuvas of Rajbas, but the Rajba brings an answer. The Rajba says over there that this is a distinction that a child has with a father. The Rajba brings this, it's a shtickle poetic. The Rajba says, hey, a child is the ruchnistic offspring of his father, and his father, his parents, are contributors to the child, even if they don't really raise the child right. They're avaryanim. They didn't do a great job with the chinuch. But Lamaisa, without them, the child wouldn't be here, and whatever good the child does develop into, some shreds of it or some shrashim of it come from the parents. So since a parent contributes to his son in this manner, when a son does good things or a son turns out okay, it's looked at that the parents have some contribution to bring to the table, and therefore Brahmazaka Abba. So, and the Sefer Chassidim says this explicitly, that in regards to schusim, helping for someone who's dead, the Sefer Chassidim says, Yesh hevdul gadol min stam anashim to bein banim ubanis. Shaharei machmas mi ubesibas mi habanim mekayim mitzvahs. Who halohu machmas ha'aba? Meaning, what made the children keep the Torah, do mitzvahs? It must be because of the parents, because of the father, the mother. So children have an ability to affect their parents in Gan Eden in a way that nobody else does. Now, this doesn't mamish answer every single one of the kashas, because some of these kashas, you're going to have to expand this thought a little bit. Children affect their parents because children are offshoot of the parents, right? They're progeny of the parents. Whatever the parents did impacted them and allows them to be who they're going to be. Now, in a certain sense, if a person invests in the right things, in the right people, a person could invest in things that throw off dividends. Meaning, it doesn't dafka have to be a child. A person invests in a shul, in a yeshiva, in a night kollel, in something in wichtig, even if they're not living up to it on the highest level, but investment pays dividends. Meaning, the idea of what the Sefer Chassidim and the Rashba are saying is that if you plant a seed, you do a kernel of a mitzvah that has ripple effect, that grows on its own, the investment will pay off on its own. Meaning, and that is almost looked at as your own schusim that are percolating and germinating to the top. Meaning, that's not schusim. Somebody else is not giving you schusim. Those are your own schusim that are coming, they're growing full steam. Now, in a certain sense, when Reb Meir was able to clean up Acher and bring him to Gehenna, and Reb Yechon was able to clean him, because they were Talmidim. They were impacted by Acher. Yes, Acher had Averis. Yes, Acher was not a role model in the true sense. But yes, Acher was someone who impacted them positively. Their existence of a Reb Meir spoke well of Acher. Even though Acher was imperfect, and he wasn't perfect, the existence of Reb Meir boded well for Acher. Was able to get him some results. So now a lot of these examples, you could probably say, are along those vein, where a person's own investments are able to bear fruit. But l'chaira, from these Gemaras, you don't have an actual raya that someone, a total outsider who has nothing, could stop me in the street, tell me, Rachalea Basar Sasha needs a schos, and I say, no problem, I'm going to give 10 minutes of my learning. We don't have a source that such a thing works mamish like that. Meaning, they're always, from all these chazals that we're quoting, that we're mentioning, there needs to be some sort of connection. There needs to be a reason why your actions reflect on that person, or why what you're talking about reflects on that person. And
assuming this works for grandparents also.
Yeah, grandparents zicher, meaning that's also, it's passed down. Meaning, but the idea of just a stranger, I saw the Gesher Achayim in Chil Gimel. If anyone's ever saw the Gesher Achayim is Rechiach Tukachinsky. Most people only know Tukachinsky from the Zmanim. So if you've ever used the Zmanim, then pay attention to this. Rechiach Tukachinsky, in one of his many svarim, he's actually a prolific mechaber svarim. In one of his many svarim, in Gesher Achayim, in the end, he has a tshuva over there. He struggles because he holds l'maisa. It has to be that a person could give schusim to someone else, and he says, look, puk chazi, that the Velt's minig is that if someone dies without children, you hire someone to say kaddish for them, or if someone doesn't have any frum kids, you hire someone to say kaddish for them, right? The idea of hiring someone to say kaddish, you see that somehow. Now again, you can make some sort of distinction that again, your money also is going to feed a Talmud Chacham or to, I'm saying there's an argument to be made, but he pushes very hard that there must be a source. He doesn't have a great source for it. So, like the Maram Chalava says, and the other Rishonim say, the idea that Stam, you could pledge his chusim to help someone else and clean someone else's name after they're in Gehenna already or after they're done on this earth is a shverim. I said there needs to be some sort of connection. Now, I wanted to segue from this to another similar topic. We're not going to discuss this topic, B'Shlei Musa, it's a very big topic, but I wanted to share a fascinating story, make of it what you want. And we'll leave the topic as a thought experiment. It's a common thing, everyone's heard stories about this, of people trying to sell their schusim and their averis. Right? There's different versions of these stories. One of the the oldest versions of the story is a story about the Marsha. It's a crazy story, I'll say it over. The story goes as follows. The Marsha was a Rav, I think, in Ostrovets. I could be pronouncing it wrong. He was a Rav somewhere in Poland. He had two Balabatim in his town. Let's call them Reuven and Shimon. They were partners, they were Shutvim, and they went to do business in the Yerid. They would go to the markets, and they were very successful. And the story said one time they went to a market together, they hit it off amazing, whatever product they bought or they sold, they were coming back with pockets full of cash. They were very rich, they were feeling great. They stopped in some kreitschmer, a small inn on the way home, and they were gvirish, each guy got his own room, they partied a little, they went to sleep a little, everyone was feeling great. In the morning they come down for breakfast, and Reuven looks at Shimon and he says, Shimon, something doesn't look right with you. You look like you're mamish depressed now. Shimon says, nah, I was just remembering that my kvetchy wife is at home and we're on our way home already and it's going to be a problem. He says, no, Shimon, I know your wife. This is not, what's going on? Something's bothering you. And finally, Shimon spills the beans and Shimon says, listen, last night I was feeling at the top of the world, my pocket's full of money, I was maybe a little bit inebriated. Someone propositioned me for an avera that I shouldn't have done. I was nichshel, I did something terrible. This is what Shimon says. So Reuven looks at him and he says, Shimon, you shaita. You're worried about Averis? You're a rich man. What are you worried about the silliness for? Just be happy with the money you have and let's go home. Shimon says, really? You're not worried about Averis? You don't think this is a big deal? So I'll trade you half of my profits from this whole trip if you take this Avera over instead of me. Reuven says, you shaita? Sure. I'm in. Grab it. No problem. They write up the new partnership agreement, 75-25 now. And Reuven's happy and Shimon's happy. Shimon feels like a weight was taken off his shoulders, and Reuven's delighted because this idiot gave him half the profits for nothing. They come back, everybody forgets about the story, life goes on. Several years later, Shimon, the one who did the Avera, is nifter, he dies. And the night after he dies, he comes in a dream to Reuven, and he tells Reuven, this was a terrible, terrible mistake I made. This deal I didn't know what I was doing. Now that I'm up here, what they want to do to me for this Avera, I think I said it wrong. Actually, Reuven, the guy who bought it, dies first. Shimon comes to him, and he comes to Shimon in a dream. He says, I made a terrible deal. I bought something I never should have bought. I didn't know what it was. The deal's bottled. Take it back. You can go to my almana, get the money back. This deal's over. Shimon says, no, nothing doing, no dice. A deal's a deal. And Vayikatz, he wakes up, Vayichalem, it's a dream, okay? He makes nothing. He figures the guy just died. He must be, he's thinking about all the old stories. They had a lot of water under the bridge with this guy, so he's thinking about it, fine. Next night, same dream. Again, he fights, he says, I'm not. The deal stands as it is. The third night, he comes back again, and again he says, I fight. But this time, Reuven says, you know what, if you're not masking to shtaltzut what I'm telling you, then I'm going to summon you to Din Torah. And the only place that I could summon you to Din Torah is in the Elam Emes. That's where I am. I'm going to summon you to Din Torah. That means you're probably going to die soon. And we'll hash this out in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's no other way. We'll do this in front of the Beis Din Shemala. Now, Shimon has a little bit of pause. He's a little afraid. He jumps out of bed. He goes running to the Rav of the Marsha. He bangs on the door. It's the middle of the night. A bleary-eyed Marsha comes to the door. No, actually, Marsha was sitting and learning till 4 in the morning. the Marsha comes to the door. I digress, but I'm not going to waste your time with this. Marsha comes to the door. The Marsha says, what's going on? What's this emergency middle of the night? He says, Kach v'kach v'maisa, this is the dream. Marsha tells him as follows. Marsha says, the halach in Cheshim Mishpat is like this. Nuchas Dayanim, the halach is like this. If you get summoned to Din Torah, let's say in New York, and you live in Lakewood, you're allowed to tell the person, come bring the case to me. So he says, tell Reuven, who's being tevei you, that you want to bring the case to me, to the Marsha's Beis Din. Okay, he goes back to sleep. I don't know how he fell asleep. He falls back asleep. Again, Reuven comes in the dream and he says, no, I'm asking to the Din Torah, but you're going to come with me to the Marsha. Okay, fine. Marsha's also good. I'll come to the Marsha. Marsha, feeling that this was a moment that he could really use to inspire his flock, he told everyone, he instructed everybody to gather in the shul, Anashim Nashim B'taf, and they set up this, a table with the Beis Din situation, and Reuven comes, and Shimon comes on the side somewhere, we don't know, we can't see him, and Marsha listens closely to what the neshama of Shimon is saying without seeing him. Then he listens to Reuven's counter arguments, and then he sits there and he says he deliberates a little bit, and he says, "Okay, I have a psak." Marsha says a psak like this. He says, Reuven, he says this transaction is not valid. You can't sell your avera to someone else. It's not possible. You can't sell your avera to someone else. So Shimon, who did the avera, you still need tshuva. You thought you were off the hook. You did a terrible avera. You need tshuva. But Reuven, you bought it. Buying it shows a tremendous amount of chil Hashem and ill will. So that also is hurting you tremendously. So Kilu, you get the avera. You both have the avera now. A very litvish psak. You both have the avera. Neither one's off the hook. Not you who did it. Not you who bought it. You both have the avera. He says, but because you're both stuck with the same avera, I have a solution for you. He says, Shimon, who thought that he sold his avera all along, had never bothered to do tshuva because he thought the avera was gone. So Shimon's, I'm going to give Shimon a seder at tshuva, tell him exactly what he should do to be mechaper for this avera. And if Shimon will follow all his tshuva, then both of you will have a kapara because the avera is gone for you, it's gone for Reuven, it's gone for Shimon, everybody wins. This was the Marshal's psak. So, what do you say? The money stays where it is. That's a knas. That's a knas. The money stays where it is. So this is a story that's said over about the Marshal. Now, the psak that comes out of this is that mitzad echad, we don't really think that a sale of mitzvahs and averis makes sense. Similar to what we're saying about transferring your schosim to someone else or cleaning up their averis. Mitzvahs are not this token, a Bitcoin wallet. You can just give the guy your password and everything's good. It's not really how this works. Mitzad echad from the Marshal. Mitzad sheni, the Marshal seems to say some of it transfers or whatever. Now, if you're feeling a little skeptical about the story, you're in good company. The Machne Chaim, a Talmud Chasam Sofer, in a tshuva that he has about this topic, somebody sent him the Shaila, and the Shaila wrote that there's precedent for this idea. There was a story of someone who tried to sell mitzvahs, averis, and Machne Chaim got the Shaila, and in it the Shaila writes that there's precedent because there's this Bakanta story at the Marsha. And the first 4 lines of the tshuva, just the part that I want to read, he says, Hadavar hu kele, this is this very strange thing, le shamanu me'olam. I never heard of this. Haniyeh kedavar hazebi Yisrael. Could there be such a thing in Yisrael? Umasha hamoinim magidim b'shem Marsha. This that the Welt says over a story about the Marsha. Mi yedei yesh mamashas b'masha hamoinam misafim. Who knows if there's any truth to what simple people say over? Heimem afichim ba'olam ashalei hayav le'nivra. They shoot their mouth in things that never were and never will be. Then he says, I want to go into the sugya. Now he goes into the sugya a little bit, and he ends up strongly concluding, like the tzad, that mitzvahs and averis are non-transferables. You're not able to transfer mitzvahs and averis. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't go like that. He relies on the tshuva from the Maram al-Shakar that I'm not going to go into now, which is really itself relying on the tshuva from Rav Haigain. So there's much precedent amongst the different poskim. Although I do have to be honest with you, there are poskim like the Marsham and the B'Tzel Chacham and others who say that mitzvahs and averis could be transferred, could be sold. But the Machne Chaim and the Maram al-Shakar and the Rav Haigain all seem to say not. Now, there are some, without going too much detail, there are some steers, meaning like Rayas, Lakan, from different Gemaras, like if you could transfer Schos V'Natz. I saw something from the Lublina Rav, and I'll end with this, that I think is very, very good pshara in the idea. Maybe it makes a lot of sense of the Marshal story. It's a good pshara. He says as follows. He says that every schar mitzvah and every einish for an avera, there's 2 types of schar and 2 types of einshim, he says. There's schar and einish that's like a Bitcoin wallet. You bank, you're just how rich you're getting, right? You're getting mitzvahs, you bank X amount of schar, you just have unlimited schar. Averis, it's einshim. You get, all sorts of negative, it's tokens. That's schar and einish. There's that type of schar einish, the Lublin Rav says, it's yitachan you could sell. Maybe alts arvus, maybe some sort of, trick, how it works, what the kinyan would be exactly, but it's possible that could be transferable. He says there's a second, much more integral part of mitzvahs and averis. That's the schar and the einish. And this, according to some Rishonim, is the ikar, he says, is what it does to you. Meaning a person has a neshama, you are who you are. You are the actions that you do. A person does a lot of mitzvahs, he becomes an elevated dahaybin person. His neshama becomes purified and holy and elevated. A person does a lot of averis, his neshama becomes degraded and belittled and tarnished. He says that is also a form of schar and einish. He says when Chazal say schar mitzvah, and schar mitzvah or mitzvah gereres mitzvah, what it means is schar mitzvah is you become elevated. The schar of mitzvah is mitzvah because you're elevated. You're a neshama that's more worthy of mitzvahs now. So he says that type of elevation or degradation that the neshama suffers based on mitzvahs and averis, that's non-transferable. So he says you could sell from Hein Pizmargin the actual schar. That's almost like an irrelevant bit of it. The more relevant part is the schar v'einish in how it imprints itself on a person's neshama, and that's not sellable. And l'chayra in the Marsha's pshara, so to speak, you see something like that. Meaning he says the guy who bought it, you got stuck with it. That's just a certain measurement of einshim. But the guy who did the Aveira, he didn't lose it because the impact that it had on him didn't change. The Aveira that he did left its mark on him. Now, to switch all the way to the most Litvish story, I think that this is expressed in a story that Rav Chaim Volozhin used to say about the Goin. The story goes as follows. There was a year in Vilna where there was no Daled Minim at all available, and the Goin desperately wanted Daled Minim for the year. He came upon Gvir who had Daled Minim, and he begged the guy, could you give me a Daled Minim? The Goin wanted to be Lachem, he wanted to be Makbid, it should be really his, for Yom Rishon, properly, and he's begging the guy, could I buy it off you? Could you sell it to me? The guy said, you're the Goin, I'm happy to give it to you, I'm not selling it to you, you can have it for free. On one condition, he said. On the condition that all the schar of the mitzvah that you do with the Daled Minim, this Yom Tif, goes directly to me. You don't get any schar at all. And the Goin said, that's all you want? Done. Ready to go. And the Goin, when this man left the Goin's room, the Talmidim came in and they saw the Goin sitting there smiling from ear to ear. He was delighted. And they asked the Goin, what's Rebbe, what are you so happy about? And the Goin said, you don't understand. What an opportunity I just got. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, Al tiyu kavadim hamisham shenesarav v'manas l'kabel pras. Don't be like servants who are Eved Hashem, hoping for schar. Ela tiyu kavadim hamisham shenesarav shalei v'manas l'kabel pras. Right? He says, how often does a person get an opportunity to know for sure, he's not doing it for the schar? I have no ulterior motive. I'm doing the mitzvah, ki kein tzivani habayir, because Hashem said I should take the Daled Minim. The Goin said, is that not something to be happy about? Now, I ask you, in light of the Ram al-Shakir and Rav Hai Goin, whatever, why is that not a bizayin for the mitzvah? That the Goin says, yeah, I have the schar, walk away with it, right? The teretz is obvious, chuvasi b'tzidei, is because the Goin so valued mitzvahs and what mitzvahs mean to a person, that the idea of stripping it of like the schar, like just the reward, and only treating it as a mitzvah and how that it, impacts and uplifts a person was much more joyful and elevated than focusing on the token-like schar, meaning whatever the token-like schar is. Meaning, in the Goin's world, the token schar was not on his mind b'chlal, and he was delighted that he was able to finally strip a mitzvah away to just the schar mitzvah, meaning to being elevated for mitzvahs by mitzvahs themselves. So I think this vart from the Lublina Rav, which was a very Chassidish Yid, and the story with the Goin, who's a pretty Litvish Jew, are all being kalei to the same atar. They're heading in the same vein. They're trying to uncover and discuss the same nakuda. And I think that's the ultimate, like the pshara between the various different chazals and the stories, of which there are many that we're not going to get into. Good Shabbos. To be continued.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.